Again, good morning, everyone. So I am happy to see you all. Welcome to our virtual seminar on federalism. We are also live via PILG FB page. Again, thank you and welcome to all our speakers and participants. Well, my name is Clarice Aquino from the Pimentel Institute for Leadership and Governance. So we are gathered today remotely or from a distance, but still we should be happy that we were given this opportunity to discuss topic of national importance. So just a little background of BILG. It is a non-stock, non-profit foundation founded by the late Senate President Nene Pimentel in August of 2010, shortly before he ends his term as senator in June of 2010. So the Pimentel Institute for Leadership and Governance was established to promote competent, ethical, and innovative leadership in public sector, advocate political and economic reforms needed to strengthen Philippine democracy, and of course to engage in national discourse on key issues that affects the lives of Filipinos. As I mentioned, PILG is a non-profit foundation, so our program and activities will not be possible, of course, without the help of our partners. And one of them is the Hans Idle Foundation, headed by its resident representative, Mr. Gats Heineke. And for this event, we also have the College of Continuing Advanced and Professional Studies of University of Makati, headed by Dean Ederson Tapia. The Hans Idle Foundation and the Pimentel Institute for Leadership and Governance is supporting education and information activities on federalism. So our main objectives is to provide broader and deeper knowledge of federalism, the philosophy and the perspective of federalism as a system of government, and help key representative of government and of course members of society to gain better and more comprehensive and understanding of federalism. Kasi on one hand, in my opinion also, it is important that we have knowledge of what is being discussed before we make a statement whether we agree or disagree on a certain matter. So that's why we have this seminar online on federalism. So, but before we start, some reminders. Please be informed that we will record this event. Please mute yourself when you are not talking. If someone is talking, please try to be quiet and listen. If you have anything to say or you have questions, especially during our open forum, please write it down in our chat box. And for those watching via Facebook Live comment section, your comments and suggestions are very important to us in the future. So at the end of the program, may we request everyone to please answer our survey form. Link will be posted at our chat box. So of course, special thanks to Dean Dr. Alex Brillantes, one of our senior fellow in PILG, for hosting and moderating this today event. He is a former commissioner of the Commission on Higher Education. He is also the past president of the Philippine Society for Public Administration and former dean of the UP NCPAG. Thank you, Dean, for taking time, kasi I know he's busy with his speaking engagement here and abroad. And he is also a distinct professor from different universities and colleges, also here and also in abroad. So, Dean Alex, thank you so much for hosting or moderating this event. So to formally start, it's Brillantes. Thank you, Dean. Thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
It's really a great morning, and attending and participating in webinars such as this. It's really like a gathering of friends. Most of us, we all travel the same circuit, if you may, and we see each other so many times in these different venues. And as you know, this is actually the second webinar for the under the series, because the first one was on the so-called Mandanas decision, a very, very important decision on local governments. Let's remember, dear friends, that this is really part of the, we called it the memorial series for our dear beloved Senator Nene Pimentel, who has passed on, but his legacy continues to be with us. And we all know that among his legacies was, of course, the cooperatives, local governance, and of course, federalism. So today's webinar, as mentioned by Clarice, will also be recorded, but equally important, those of you from different universities. I know students from different universities, University of Makati, Polytechnic University of the Philippines, University of the Philippines, and all. If you like, you'll be able to get a certificate as far as this concerned. So your participation. But really, the more important thing is deepening and deepening and deepening the discourse of federalism. Even if I don't know, some would say it's not yet. It's not the front burner on the of government today. But anyway, we're extremely privileged that we have with us no less than the Chief Justice, who we will introduce later on. But as Ma'am Clarice mentioned, I would like to call on my good friend, the Dean of the College of Continuing Advanced Education and Professional Studies of the University of Makati, Dean Ederson de los Trino Tapia, as really one of the leaders and really upcoming in the field of public administration. He's actually one of our key leaders in public administration. But before he was Dean of the College of Governance, he was also a senior lecturer at the University of the Philippines. And he was educated in the Philippines and abroad in Malaysia and also in England at the King's College, London. And he just finished, among others, his second PhD. His first PhD was on leadership, and his second PhD was DPA, actually, was from the University of the Philippines. And he has also lectured and participated in many programs in Asia Institute Europe and also the Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. So with that, I would like to welcome and request my good friend, our good friend, to give us his welcoming remarks. Dean Tapia, sir.
Thank you very much, Dean Alex. As always, you're very generous with your description and your words. Perhaps Dean Alex failed to mention that I am honored to be one of his mentees. Over the years, we learned a lot from Alex Brillantes' work, not only as a professor at UP, but he's a professor of the world. No, he's one of our pillars in the public administration circuit, if you will, not only here in the Philippines but in easily in Asia. So, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you again to the Pimentel Memorial Lecture Series. As you very well know, as correctly pointed out by Clarice earlier, Senator Pimentel, Senator Nene Pimentel stood for a great number of issues, but perhaps he is most identified with his work on local governance and federalism. Over the years, I have had the privilege of discussing this issue with him back in the day when only few were actively talking about it. To its advocates, federalism became a byword in about circa 2016 when President Duterte ran a campaign on this platform, among others. It could very well have been said that it was the heyday of the federalism discourse in the Philippines, and many experts, in fact, came out of the woodwork. Conferences and symposia were held in a staggering number, and educating the people about its promises, perils, and prospects became the order of the day. In fact, I have had the honor to speak on federalism in places such as Makati, Palawan, Cebu, Cagayan de Oro, among others. No, many of them with Tatay, with Dean Alex, and several of our other friends here. I even had the opportunity to discuss the matter with a group of Filipinos in Guam. But the most serious government effort in federalism, in fact, happened when President Duterte created a consultative commission chaired by Chief Justice Reynato Puno, and whose illustrious members included Tatay Nene. Those were heady days, but they were filled with much promise and hope. I remember having a conversation with Commissioner Gwen Pimentel that it was a great thing that all of those developments were unraveling at a time when Tatay was still up and about and could actively participate in the debate. You know very well that Tatay's advocacy on federalism started way back, perhaps in the 70s, along with Dean Alex and our other friends here. But the question is, and this is something that we can discuss this morning, the project is still unfinished. Many have in fact conscripted it to the dustbin of big ideas that never happened. The more moderate ones have found an alternative ground, a middle ground, if you will, an acceleration of efforts at local governance and decentralization, accentuated by developments such as the Mandanas decision, which was our topic in the inaugural lecture a few weeks back. I am sure there are a plethora of questions before us, but none more pointed than the prospects of federalism ever happening. And this is why this morning's gathering is a very important one, having in our midst gatekeepers, opinion makers, policymakers, academics, and observers, and we can expect a hearty discussion on the topic as we invite all to actively engage our speakers and learn from them and from each other. Thank you very much, dear friends, and I look forward to a very fruitful session with you. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Dean Ed, for that very, very articulate opening remarks. Really sharp as ever. I would say the talk, Dean Ed. Okay. We're very privileged, as we said today. We are really, it's really a gathering of friends uh, interested in this very, very issue of governance, good governance, decentralization, and federalism. And of course, our partners, one of our partners who have been with us through the years is the Hans Seidel Foundation, and they have continued to be a very strong partner of the Pimentel Institute of Local Governance and Leadership in Local Governance. And we're extremely grateful that the resident representative, Mr. Gotts Heineke, is himself with us. Uh, Sir Gotts is a full-fledged lawyer, and after completing his second legal state examination in Germany in 2002, he worked with a law firm in Munich, Germany, for more than 2 years. Thereafter, he joined the Hans Seidel Foundation in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, where he stayed for 10 years, initially as a project assistant and later on as its resident representative. He has been with us since 2016. He has been the resident representative of the Hans Seidel Foundation Philippine office. And we would like now to introduce Mr. Gotts Heineke. Sir Gotts?
Oo. Sir, I guess si Sir Gats daw po is nakakaroon ng technical difficulty. So we are introducing Ms. Caroline Lee, the project officer of the Hans Seidel Foundation.
Hello, Carol. Nice to see
Hello.
you.
Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Good morning, Dean. Brillantes. Good morning, everyone. Uh, okay. Since I'm unable to see everyone in one screen, I'll just proceed. As Clarice said, I'm Carol Lee, Program Officer of the Hans Seidel Foundation, and I'll step in for now while Mr. Heineke works on addressing the technical issues. So we have been working with PILG since 2016. It is indeed our great privilege to have had the opportunity to conduct several uh, information activities together. This These I specify on information activities since, as you know, the conversation in the Philippines on federalism has been around since way back. And then there have been several attempts at introducing changes to the charter since more than 10 years. And we are here to support the information activities mainly because we believe that people should understand, first and foremost, what federalism is before they decide either way. So the Hans Seidel Foundation has no position as to whether it would be, it should adopt a federal system or not. The main idea is to support the discourse, to give people the chance to really dig into the details, understand what it is all about, how the Philippines can, if ever, benefit from such a system, how it can adapt it to its advantage, to help it in its development. So, as Dean Tapia earlier mentioned, the discussion continues, and we work continuously with the PILG in support of that. The past 3 years, well, this year we start the next 3-year project cycle, and we continue to see, we continue to plan, to expect, to support the activities planned together with the PILG. And with this change in the format of things, we're now mostly more online than having in-person activities. And the PILG has very quickly also adapted to that. We're really, really proud to be working with the PILG team, and we're also coming up with new formats. Will be coming up. They have already PILG has already launched the electronic newsletter, and soon we'll be working on more innovative content on federalism. We're looking forward to that. So uh, we're really happy to have a very illustrious speaker today. We're looking forward to a very dynamic exchange and very insightful discussion. And I wish you all a good morning, and yeah, enjoy the activity. Thank you. And regards, of course, from Mr. Heineke. Hopefully, if he can be in already soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. And indeed, we've been partners for some time, and a number of fora here and not in Manila, but in other parts. We have been partners with the Heinz Edel Foundation and other foundations. And she mentioned, that indeed we are graced today by a very, very illustrious speaker to talk to us and discuss with us the project. As Dean Ed Tapia said, it's still an unfinished project, but as Carol mentioned, it's something that we've talked about for some time. I remember in UP, in Padre Faura, then I remember Dean Gabriel Iglesias, that was 1979, and we were already talking about federalism as a possible option in our continuing search for the appropriate political administrative systems for the Philippines. It's my privilege and honor to introduce to you our illustrious speaker for today. Kilalang kilala na po natin ang ating panauhing tagapagsalita sa umagang ito po, na sa marami ay siyang nagsisilbing ilaw, gabay at boses ng pagbabago ng sistema. Ang bagong sistema tungo sa bagong pag-asa. His advocacy for constitutional and system change began in 2010, shortly after his retirement from the Supreme Court. At bagamat kilalang-kilala na natin siyang lahat, pahintulutan po ninyong ipaalam ko sa inyo ang ilang bagay tungkol po sa ating panauhing pandangal. Our speaker distinguished himself in the field of law and attained the highest position a lawyer could aspire for, being the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court. And his career in government spanned nearly 4 decades, 39 years to be exact, beginning in the 1971 as solicitor in the office of the Solicitor General, and he rose from the ranks and became acting city judge, assistant solicitor general, appellate justice of the Intermediate Appellate Court, deputy minister of justice, and associate justice of the Court of Appeals from 1986 to 1993. It was in 1993 when President Fidel Ramos appointed him to the Supreme Court as associate justice, and in 2006 he became the 22nd Chief Justice until his retirement in 2010. In his younger days, like many of you guys, he was a student leader and editor-in-chief of the Philippine Collegian and Law Register while studying at the University of the Philippines, where he finished his Bachelor of Science in Jurisprudence and Bachelor of Laws in 1962. He went on to complete Master of Comparative Laws in 1967 at the Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, in the United States, as a full scholar by the Academy of American Law and Master of Laws. A year later at the University of California, Berkeley, also as a full scholar by the Walter Perry Johnson Foundation. Dahil po sa kanyang ipinamalas na kagalingan, katapatan at kahusayan sa paglilingkod ng bayan at sa kanyang judicial activism, 1 kilometro po ang haba ng listahan. Pero pahintulutan niyo banggitin po ang ilan lang po. He received one of the highest awards, the Order of Lacandula Award with the rank of Bayani, given by the President of the Philippines, the first awardee for judicial statesmanship, Great Libertarian Award and Defender of Constitution Award by the PhilConsa, Philippine Constitution Association, Araw ng Maynila, Outstanding Jurist given by the City of Manila, 10 Outstanding Young Men of the Philippines in the field of law, Centennial Award of the United Methodist Church, and Ulirang Ama Award gawad by the National Mother's Day and Father's Day Foundation. And he is the only Filipino to receive the Distinguished Global Alumni Award given by the Deadman School of Law, Southern Methodist University, and the Elise and Walter has foundation at the University of California. Bilang Chief Justice po, ipinamana po niya sa atin ang tatlong mahalagang proteksyon ng ating mga karapatan bilang mamamayan. Una, ang writ of amparo to protect us against enforced disappearance and extrajudicial killings. Pangalawa, the writ of habeas data to protect our right to privacy. At pangatlo, the writ of kalikasan to protect our right to a healthy environment. And in 2018, President Rodrigo Duterte recalled him from retirement to head the consultative committee to review the 1987 Constitution and draft a constitution that will usher in the country's shift from a unitary to federal form of government. Our topic today, after 5 months of in-depth research, analysis, and hard work, debates, and lengthy discussions, drafting and redrafting the CONCON under its leadership, submitted its draft and called it Bayanihan Federalism, Draft Constitution for an Indissoluble Republic. This draft constitution, consistent with the federal mandate, gives power to the regions and power to the people. I know that there are a number of members of the committee who are also with us today, and we would like to give them also a special welcome. I saw Sir Ding Hinarosa earlier. It is hoped that this will be, it is hoped that this will be his Chief Justice's final and lasting legacy to a nation in search of government that will fulfill the aspirations of its people, a nation in search for a better life for its people, a nation in search for itself. So fellow Filipinos and believers in goodness of the Filipino, it is my honor and privilege to introduce to you the leading light and voice of the Bagong Sistema, Bagong Pag-asa, the chairman of the Consultative Committee to review the 1987 Constitution, indeed one of the greatest Chief Justice of the Philippines, the Honorable former Chief Justice Reynato S. Puno. Let's welcome Chief Justice. Sir.
Good morning to everybody, and thank you, Dean Alex, for the generous introduction. Let me omit the usual salutations. After all, they have been given by, among others, Charis and Dean Alex. But let me greet the members of our consultative committee who are virtually present with us. I see President Virgilio Bautista and Attorney Susana Ordinario. I greet also a special friend, Tony Calao. In the interest of time and with your leave, let me begin. Our unitary system has been our system of government from the time we were governed by the Spaniards, the Japanese, and the Americans. We chose the same system, the same unitary system when we were given our independence. Thus, our 1935, 1973, and 1987 constitutions continuously installed a unitary system of government to run us. In fine, we have as a nation and as a people centuries of experience with the unitary system of government. While consideredly the unitary system of government has brought to us a lot of benefits, our humble submission is that it is high time to shift to a federal system of government. The great need for peace, for unity, and for harmony has eluded us under the unitary system of government. Thus, the unitary system run by the Spaniards mothered the revolution led by Bonifacio and the Katipunan by Rizal, the Del Pilars, and the Mabini. The unitary system run by the Japanese and the Americans resulted in local insurrections by the Hukbalahaks, the hukbong mapagpalaya laban sa Hapon. The unitary system run by ourselves exploded in the 1986 EDSA revolution. Breath life in the separatist movement in the Cordillera and the various independence movements in Mindanao, led by the MNLF, the IMILF, the Abu Sayyaf, and others. We have the Bangsamoro Organic Act, but so far it has failed to bring peace and progress in Bangsamoro. In fact, the law is facing a serious constitutional challenge in the Supreme Court. But more than this challenge is the growing perception that it is not working on the ground. Since last Sunday, November 22, the news is that there is a proposal to extend the term of the interim Bangsamoro government beyond June 30, 2022. This proposal has received a lot of protests from Sulu, Basilan, and Lanao del Sur. Heaven forbid we may be seeing again a disaster in Mindanao. And so this is the main thrust of our Bayanihan Federalism, to prevent our disunity as a people, to foster our harmony, and to spread political and economic equality. It is our continuing submission that federalism, whose essence is non-centralization of powers as opposed to mere decentralization of powers, is best suited to a country where there is a lot of diversity which are difficult to reconcile. Diversities are principally caused by geographical divisions, by culture, by tradition, by language, and by religion. The Philippines is an archipelago with more than 7,000 islands, with people of different cultures speaking various languages and dialects, with numerous indigenous people, and with people of warring opposite religious beliefs. Just one of these factors can divide a country, can breed separatist movements, or ignite civil wars in the exercise of the people's right to self-determination. History tells us that mere difference in language threatened the unity of Belgium and of Canada and drove them to adopt a federal form of government. In fine, federalism is better suited to deal with irreconcilable diversities in states because it allows government to accord an asymmetric treatment to people with these diversities. Alikes can be treated as alikes or symmetrically, and unalikes can be treated as unalikes or asymmetrically. And these powers are reconfigured and divided according to the diversities of the member states in the federal constitution itself. It means the power given to member states cannot be taken away by the legislature, by the president, or by the courts. The reconfiguration of these powers, their grant to the member states, all done in the Constitution itself, is what distinguishes federalism from a unitary form of government. It is our respectful submission that the federalism proposed in the Bayanihan Constitution will better respond to the threat of disintegration posed by these separatist movements. The proposed federalism is the type that assures a permanent and indissoluble union. This indissoluble union is proclaimed right in the preamble of the Bayanihan Constitution itself. You know, there are two models of federalism. On the issue of whether the union that will be established is the dissoluble or the indissoluble kind. In the first model, where the union is dissoluble, you can find in the Constitution an exit provision which allows a member state to withdraw legally from the federation. In the second model, where the union is indissoluble, you will not find this exit provision in the Constitution. Instead, you will find a provision giving the president or the prime minister of the federal government what is known as the step-in power to prevent any threat to the unity of the nation. Thus, Article 20, Section 4 of the Bayanihan Constitution provides, and I quote, "In case any region fails to comply with its obligation as provided for in the Constitution, which seriously undermines the sovereignty, territorial integrity, economy, or unity of the Federal Republic, the President may intervene and take all measures necessary and proper to address the failure. From another lens, there are two types of federalism: the competitive kind and the cooperative type. In the competitive kind of federalism, the member states have more or less the same standing in terms of economic strength. And so they are allowed more leeway to compete with each other in the race to be the more progressive state. And sometimes the competition results in the adoption of laws, rules, and regulations that are less than fair to the other member states. And they become ruinous, given the different and uneven stages of development of our regions. We did not adopt this competitive kind of federalism. Instead, we adopted the cooperative type of federalism because this model is more in accord with our culture of bayanihan, the culture of helping those behind, a culture that is opposite the culture that allows the devil to devour the hindmost. And in order to foster this cooperative type of federalism, you will see that the Bayanihan Constitution does not allow the imposition of double taxation. It has also an equalization fund, which is not less than 3% of the annual General Appropriations Act, that will be given to poor regions to enable them to achieve financial viability and economic sustainability. It also established an intergovernmental commission whose function, among others, is to promote friendly and cooperative relationship among the regions. Let me now go to the decision of the consultative committee to establish a federal presidential instead of a federal parliamentary form of government. This was a topic intensely debated in the consultative committee. And at the end of the protracted discussion, the federal presidential form of government won by one vote. I remember it was the late Nene Pimentel who cast the decisive vote. And to date, the debate continues on which type is better, whether it is the British parliamentary model, the American presidential model, or the hybrid models in Europe. Let me just stress, however, that the presidential government which we installed in the Bayanihan Federal Constitution is entirely different from the defective presidential system engrafted under a unitary system in our 1987 Constitution. And so this should eliminate the fear that there will be no improvement in our federal system of government since we just adopted en toto the same presidential system with its known defects. And so let me tell you some of the meaningful changes we made on the federal legislature, the executive, and the judiciary to improve their performance and adjust their functioning to a federal system. We begin with the Senate. We altered its composition. According to the Bayanihan Constitution, each region shall be represented by at least 2 senators elected by the voters from the regions. This is to address the anomaly where Visayas and Mindanao are sometimes unrepresented or oftentimes underrepresented in the Senate. This is the result of the uneven number of distribution of voters in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Hence, from time immemorial, the voice of our Muslim brothers from Mindanao has been silenced. It is one cause that is fueling their secessionist movement, and reason is on their side. With the new provision assuring representation of every region in the Senate, regardless of the number of its voters, we hope to end this political inequality. We are following here the principle of equalizing the unequal in political representation. Let me go to the composition of the House. The composition will be as follows. Not more than 400 in total number. 60% shall be elected by the districts, 40% to be elected nationwide through a system of proportional representation, where political parties shall be voted upon. And so let me stress that under the Bayanihan Constitution, the people will not be seeing in the Senate or in the House of Representatives the hereditary heirs of political dynasties. And the reason is because we categorically prohibited political dynasties, which the 1987 Constitution failed to do. Included in the ban are members of the family within the second degree of consanguinity or affinity. Studies show and concur that the poorest provinces in the country are those run by political dynasties. Likewise, under the Bayanihan Constitution, the people will no longer find in the Senate or in the House of Representatives the so-called political butterflies or the political balimbings. We prohibited members of any political party from changing parties within their term of office. Any person who violates this prohibition will, among others, be removed from the office to which he has been elected. And any party that accepts it will have its registration cancelled. The Bayanihan Constitution also reformed the internal government of political parties to free them from the dictation of party bosses. It also regulated contributions to candidates to stop the soaring cost of elections and to prevent their captivity by the oligarchs of the undesirable variety, and also to prevent their capture by criminal syndicates like the wetting lords and the drug lords. Under the Bayanihan Constitution, we also redefined and rearranged some of the powers of Congress in order to make them conform to the rule of law. Under the 1987 Constitution, we see how the power of impeachment, for instance, has evolved and deteriorated into a pure political process from initiation to trial. Due to this unfortunate alchemy, the impeachment process from beginning to end is participated alone by politicians, and no part of the political process can be questioned in the Supreme Court, even if it violates the Constitution. Our view is that the impeachment process has been too much politicized, and its use as a political weapon is a departure from the rule of law and mocks our democracy. Hence, under the Bayanihan Constitution, we change the characteristic and the nature of the power to impeach. The first aspect, the initiation aspect, will still remain political in nature and will be wielded by Congress. However, we change the second aspect, the trial aspect, and made it judicial in nature. Hence, the power to try impeachment cases will be exercised by the Constitutional Court and no longer by the Senate. The big difference is that the constitutional rights of any respondent under impeachment, especially the right to a fair trial, will be protected. In regard to the presidency, the Bayanihan Constitution installed a strong president. As I stated, the Federal Republic is intended to be permanent and to be indissoluble. And the key player in preventing its dissolution is the president. Hence, the president continues to be vested with the power of full control over the executive departments, bureaus, and offices under the federal government, and the power to ensure that all laws are faithfully executed. His commander-in-chief powers, as I explained, has been enhanced, for he has been given the step-in power to prevent the disintegration of the Union. And catch this, in case of a cyber attack on any public utility or private entity, the magnitude of which clearly endangers the security of the Republic, the President is given all the necessary and proper power to repel and to quell the attack. This power is ultra important today. For today, cyber attacks through modern technology are the greatest dangers faced by states. The 1987 Constitution has no provision on how we can defend against cyber attacks, which are done in hundreds of ways through sophisticated technologies. The Bayanihan Constitution also provides that the President and the Vice President will be elected in tandem or as a team. The Vice President is to be appointed as a member of the cabinet without need of confirmation by the Commission on Appointments. Again, this is unlike the 1987 Constitution, where the President and the Vice President-elect can come from different political parties and play the cat and mouse game in their entire term of office. So let me also discuss the various changes we propose in the Bayanihan judiciary responsive to the needs of our time. The two most serious problems of the judiciary today are the following. First, the slow dispensation of justice due to the clogged dockets of the different courts. And the second most serious problem is its incomplete independence from the political branches of government. Unless we can diminish these twin problems, the judiciary cannot effectively fulfill its constitutional duty government from violation. Let me explain how the Bayanihan Constitution proposed to solve the turtle speed of our justice system. Unlike the 1987 Constitution, or under the 1987 Constitution, we only have one High Court, the Supreme Court, which is composed of 15 justices. By and large, these 15 justices are what is known in the legal profession as generalists, as opposed to specialists. Generalists are knowledgeable in all kinds and species of law, while specialists are knowledgeable in specific branches of law. In addition to their overwhelming work in the Supreme Court, all our present justices also sit in tribunals that decide election contests involving the president, the vice president, the members of the Senate, and the House of Representatives. In addition, these justices perform non-judicial duties. And so, however good, however hardworking these 15 justices are, it is simply impossible for them to speedily dispose of their cases, considering the greater inflow of cases rather than their outflow. And so, under the Bayanihan Constitution, we propose to establish 4 high courts: the Supreme Court, a constitutional court, an administrative court, and an electoral court. The Supreme Court will be composed of generalist justices, while the constitutional, the administrative, and the electoral high courts will be composed of specialist justices, specialists in constitutional law, specialists in administrative law, and specialists in election law. And so by the use of both generalist and specialist justices, we expect the decision of cases to be faster, and also we expect the quality of decisions to be better. To be sure, this is not a novel experiment. Other jurisdictions in Europe, in the Americas, and in Asia have adopted this model of multiple high courts, especially the adoption of a constitutional court which originated from Germany. To emphasize, we propose the adoption of an electoral high court to solve once and for all the anomaly of election contests involving the highest elective officials of the land, which the Supreme Court acting as a presidential tribunal cannot decide on time on the matter of enhancing the independence of the judiciary. The Bayanihan Constitution proposed the reorganization of the Judicial and Bar Council in order to dilute the representation of the political branches of the government therein. The Judicial and Bar Council is the all-important body that vets the qualifications of nominees to the judiciary. There are two kinds of members in the Judicial Bar Council, the ex officio members and the regular members. To compose the ex officio members, we propose the Chief Justices of the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court, the Administrative Court, the Electoral Court, and the Ombudsman, the Court Administrator, the Chairperson of the Civil Service Commission, the Chairperson of the Commission on Audit, and to represent the political branches of government, we propose the Secretary of Justice, a representative of the Senate belonging to the minority, and a representative of the House representing the majority. As regular members, the JBC shall have a representative from the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, a law professor, a retired justice from the Supreme Court, and a representative from the Association of Generals and Flag Officers. Hence, there will be 15 members of the Judicial and Bar Council, and only 3 of the 15 will come from the political branches of government. We also change the sole power of the President to appoint the justices of the High Court. Per our suggestion, 1/3 of the justices of the High Court will be appointed by the President, 1/3 by Congress, and 1/3 by the High Court justices themselves. Also, we took away from the President the power to promote and to transfer judges and gave this power to the Supreme Court itself. And as I stated, we took away the power to try impeachment cases from the Senate and gave it to the Constitutional Court. But there is another innovation, a radical innovation, which we propose in the Bayanihan Constitution in regard to the exercise of judicial power, an innovation which we borrowed from Germany with modifications. Under the 1987 Constitution, the constitutionality of a law can be assailed in our courts only after their enactment and implementation. And so a lot of times, this practice has resulted in political and economic instability. For sometimes, the law is challenged long after it has been enforced. And hence, to declare it unconstitutional will have a lot of unsettling effects. Or sometimes the validity of a law is immediately challenged. But it takes courts too long a time to resolve the case. And again, the delay causes uncertainty, causes instability, which is unhealthy and prejudicial to the interests of our people. And so, under the Bayanihan Constitution, we tried to remedy this anomaly by allowing the Supreme Court to give advisory opinions on the constitutionality of an enrolled bill when requested by the President, the Senate President, or the Speaker of the House of Representatives. In other words, when a bill is of paramount importance to the people, the Bayanihan Constitution allows the heads of the three branches of government to get together, study the constitutionality of the law in advance, and preclude its constitutional challenge. In fine, under the Bayanihan Constitution, the approach is preventive rather than reactive. There is fusion of powers instead of separation of powers on cases of paramount importance to the people. Again, we adopted this approach, for we believe this is more aligned with the Bayanihan culture of our people. These are but some of the changes in our proposed federal presidential system in the Bayanihan Constitution. Again, I relate these changes to disabuse the minds of some that we are adopting the presidential system in our unitary government under the 1987 Constitution with all its defects and deficiencies. Let me now go to the Federated Regions, their structure, their powers, and their finances. Our discussion in the consultative committee revolve around two issues. Number one, the number of federated regions, and number two, whether all regions, regardless of their development, will be federated. There were several numbers suggested on how many should be the federated regions. But finally, we agreed on 16 plus the Bangsamoro and the Cordilleras, the latter two to be given asymmetric treatment. We also agreed that all regions will be federalized, regardless of their state of economic development. We rejected the concept of creeping federalism, where weak states are disallowed to join the federation until they are able to satisfy the criteria for the union. It is our belief that the problems posed by weak regions are not insurmountable. And among others, the equalization fund can be used precisely to assist the backward regions. Again, in making this decision, we were guided by the spirit of Bayanihan, the spirit of togetherness. Let me explain briefly the political structure of the Federated Regions. The 16 regions will have a symmetric structure. A legislature called an assembly, an executive called a regional governor, and a judicial composed of a Supreme Court, an appellate court, and trial courts. The regional assembly is to be composed of elected members, have to be elected from each province, highly urbanized city, and independent chartered city, and have to come from political parties elected by region. The region shall have a governor and a deputy governor who shall be elected by the members of the assembly from their own ranks. They shall be elected as a tandem, as a team, and the deputy governor shall act as the presiding officer of the assembly. The governor is vested with the usual executive powers, the power to execute the laws, the power to appoint officials within the regions, and so forth. The number of courts in the region, as well as their jurisdiction, shall be provided by law to be enacted by their assembly. Let me now go to the crux of every federalism. The division of powers between the federal government and the regions. Two principles guided us in designing the division of powers. One, that the union should be indestructible and indissoluble, and that the federal government should be stronger than the regions. And number two, the region should be given enough powers to make them vibrant and to keep them viable and sustainable. We have to allocate what is known as exclusive powers, exclusive to the federal government and exclusive to the region. We have to determine likewise the division of what is known as shared powers, shared by both the federal government and the regional governments. And we have to decide who will exercise the reserve powers of government. This delicate division of powers is written in the Constitution itself. And this is what distinguishes a federal from a unitary government. A unitary government has a monopoly of power and may or may not delegate this power, may or may not share this power. And history tells us that a unitary government will not let go this power, especially if the levers of power have been captured by political dynasties and by economic elites. And so how did we divide the powers of government? We gave the traditional exclusive powers to the federal government. And these are defense, foreign affairs, international trade, customs and tariff, citizenship, immigration, monetary policy, and others. And to the regions, we gave the following exclusive powers, among others: socio-economic planning, the creation of sources of revenue, financial administration and management, economic zones, land use, business permits and licenses. Now, powers which are not exclusively given to the federal government and the regions are to be shared by both governments. Shared powers are powers that can be exercised jointly or separately by the federal government and the regional governments. Unlike other federal constitutions, we intentionally did not enumerate these shared powers in order to give both the federal government and the regional governments the necessary flexibility. And we assigned the reserve powers of the state to the federal and not to the regional governments. Reserve powers are powers not exclusively given to the federal or regional government, not shared by them, and not prohibited by the Constitution. Reserve powers are often invoked for the self-preservation of a state. We gave the reserve powers to the federal government, again consistent with our objective of having a strong and indissoluble union. The ideal is to create regions which are economically self-sufficient and sustainable. And to achieve this objective, the Bayanihan Constitution gave the regions their own power to levy and collect certain taxes, licenses, and fees, such as the real property tax, the estate tax, the donors tax, the documentary tax, the road users tax, and others. In addition, all the regions are to receive the following revenues. And these revenues are substantial. A share of not less than 50% of all the collected income taxes, excise taxes, value added tax, and customs duties. Another one, they are to receive 50% of all net revenues derived from the exploration, development, and utilization of all natural resources within their territory. And as I stated before, there will be an equalization fund, which shall not be less than 3% of the general appropriations fund, to be given to regions that need further financial assistance. And so with all these monies, the different regions can draw their own economic development plan and fund them accordingly. Thus, the country's wealth will not be concentrated in Metro Manila, but will be dispersed to all regions. The culture of dependence on Imperial Manila will come to an end. And hopefully, gone will be the days when governors, mayors, and barangay captains cannot assist their constituencies hit by pandemic like COVID-19, hit by disasters like typhoons Rolly and Ulysses for lack of money.
Thank you.
I wish I can discuss the other parts and aspects of the Bayanihan Constitution, touching on our fight against graft and corruption, our battle against monopolies, our campaign to attract foreign investments, and the need to restore the lost sovereignty of our people by eliminating all obstacles in the exercise of their rights through people's initiative. But with your leave, let me just discuss one other aspect of the Bayanihan Constitution, which is totally not in the 1987 Constitution. I refer to the inclusion in the Bill of Rights of the basic socio-economic rights and the basic environmental and ecological rights of our people. Heretofore, the Bill of Rights of our 1935, 1973, and 1987 Constitution protect only the civil and political rights of our people. In other words, under these constitutions, our people can only demand from the government the enforcement of their civil and political rights. But time has shown that socio-economic rights and environmental rights are equally important as civil and political rights. Indeed, for the poor, these socio-economic rights and environmental rights are more important than civil and political rights. For sure, a poor person is not interested in his constitutional right to travel when he does not even have shoes to wear. So what are these socio-economic rights of the people, which we included in the Bill of Rights of the Bayanihan Constitution? These are the right to adequate food, the right to universal and comprehensive healthcare, the right to quality education, the right to adequate and decent housing and livelihood, as well as employment opportunities. And what are the basic environmental rights of the people that we included in the Bill of Rights? They are the right to healthful environment, the right to clean air, clean water, clean soil, and clean surrounding. To be sure, modern constitutions have already incorporated the socio-economic rights and environmental rights in their Bill of Rights. We have lagged behind, and yet we boast of being the oldest democracy in Asia. I will conclude by quoting a portion of the keynote address delivered by the late beloved Nene Pimentel at the opening session of the second International Conference on Decentralization held July 25, 2002, entitled Federalization, an idea whose time has come. And this is what he said. The proposal to convert the republic into a federal republic of the Philippines rests upon two main reasons. One, to speed up the economic development of the entire nation. And two, to lay down the basis for a just and lasting peace in Mindanao. The experience of countries that have adopted the federal system of government validate the point that there is more leeway for countries to modernize and develop under a federal setup than if they are governed centrally. Thank you and good day to all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chief Justice. Indeed, a tour de force, if you may, of the Bayanihan Constitution. And I'm sure many of us at one point only focus on federalism, but you did say there were a lot of other innovations that included reforms in the judiciary, that included, among other things, dynasties. And I'm sure our next speaker will be very interested to speak about that, he being an expert in that. And of course, Mr. Chief Justice, you talk about the Bill of Rights, the innovations as far as the socio-political and equally important environmental rights. It was almost gratifying to note, Mr. Chief Justice, that you ended with a quote from Tatay Nene. That was indeed a conference that we helped organize. It was called in 2002. It was on, this was decentralization and power shift, which Senator Nene indeed organized together with us at the university. But it's really so nice to listen to you, tour de force indeed. And one of the points you raised pertain to, among others, dynasties. But of course, I don't know if our next speaker will focus on that, because our next speaker, indeed an expert, political economy person, has become very famous, among other things, because of his work on, among other things, governance and dynasties. But let me introduce him. Thank you very much again, Mr. Chief Justice. Oh, and before I proceed to introducing Dr. Mendoza. So the president of PILG, Gwen, is with us. I just saw that you came in. I know you just came in from a radio program, but welcome back. And like I said, dear Nanay and dear Gwen, this lecture series is really almost a gathering of friends as we collectively work towards the towards the goal, the vision articulated by Tatay Nene Pimentel, whom we really sincerely miss so much. Our next speaker, dear friends, is Dr. Ronald U. Mendoza. He's the Dean of the Ateneo School of Government of Ateneo de Manila. Indeed, one of our most respected scholars today. It's been a privilege to really listen to him, work with him, a very respected academic. Dr. Mendoza has an extensive background in international development policy and international cooperation with a resume that includes work in the UN, United Nations, the Asian Institute of Management, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Dr. Mendoza has collaborated with government officials, academics, and representatives of private, nonprofit sectors to advance reforms that could improve human development, reduce poverty, and elicit more inclusive economic and political development. A global thinker, a global worker, he has carried out research, technical assistance engagements, and missions to developing countries including Ethiopia, Mongolia, Senegal, Thailand, Turkey, Kyrgyz Republic of Ukraine, among others. And before joining the Ateneo School of Government, he was with the Asian Institute of Management as a professor. Together with Ateneo researchers, and this is what I was referring to earlier, he co-authored a study, much quoted, much referred to study on the impact of political dynasties on poverty and underdevelopment in the Philippine countryside. I recall it was even featured as a headline in our national dailies. But that's one of the aspects that he does so many things, but he's an expert on this. And I think he'll refer to this also. I don't know, Ron, if he'll do this within the context of federalism. Dr. Mendoza also worked with Ateneo, LaSalle, UP, and an international group of researchers on building inclusive democracies in ASEAN. And that book, which he published, won the Outstanding Book Award for 2016 from the Philippine National Academy of Science and Technology. Dear friends, a privilege, a pleasure to introduce to you the Dean of the Ateneo School of Government, the respected Dr. Ronald U. Mendoza. Ron, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Dean Alex. Thank you for the very generous introduction. I would like to thank Chief Justice Puno, si Ma'am Bing. I know that she's watching also. Our friends from Pimentel Institute, si Dean Ed, Tony, and others who are joining us. Indeed, I'm very happy to join this group. And when Dean Alex invited me, I immediately agreed because as he described it, it's almost a gathering of friends, of like-minded citizens pushing for pretty much similar reform agenda to strengthen our democracy. I will try to keep my comments brief. I think I've spoken a lot about decentralization and federalism already in various forums, but I would like to bring us to the present. And I want to thank Chief Justice Puno for basically reviewing the strengths of the Bayanihan Constitution proposal. In particular, innovations like the Equalization Fund, the strengthening of regions, and even, as he described, addressing political inequality in the country by strengthening representation from the different provinces and regions of the Philippines. I remember when I was talking to Sen Nene not some months ago, that he said this might be a way for new leaders to emerge from the various regions in our country, because he knew it was expensive and it was a big undertaking to run for office, to actually aspire for national public service. And so he said to me actually over a lunch meeting that he said, as long as you can meet every single person in your jurisdiction and put that effort in there to listen to them, to meet them, to engage them, then you have a fighting chance, Ron, even if you don't have money. This was his message to basically the young leaders, right? I will, however, share some practical thoughts about where we can take the reform at this stage. I guess this could be my contribution, as Dean Alex mentioned. I do research on corruption and political dynasties, but I hope you will not remember me as an expert on corruption and political dynasties. That's sort of a bad branding. I would like to go for expert on good governance and institutions building, which is really what we want, and which is what Chief Justice Puno has been presenting on. I do think that because of the strength of the innovations in the Bayanihan Constitution proposal, there's going to be rough political economy pushing against it, which we have seen in 2018 when this proposal was actually advanced. And many of us were really concerned that it would be hijacked by the powers that be, which it eventually was. Let's just be very candid about that. And so some groups do not want to liberalize the economy. Some groups do not want dynasty regulation. Some groups do not want the deep reforms that this particular proposed constitution is actually tabling. So I would like to quote my good friend Dean Ed Araral of National University of Singapore. We've had discussions about this. I'm sure he has also discussed with Chief Justice Puno and with Dean Alex. We were thinking that perhaps what we need is a grand bargain. How do we convince our elites to actually agree to cede some of their power and influence in the interest of the long run growth and development of the country? When in fact, the present status quo already gives them very, very potent power. So why would they give it up, right? Why would you give it to young leaders emerging from the regions when you already have the power to run for national? Why would the political dynasties agree to dynasty regulation when they already have a lot of sunk cost in the system that we have? Uh, and why would the oligarchs agree to greater competition when in fact they are already benefiting from the present status quo? So si Dean, Ed, and I were thinking, well, we need some kind of practical grand bargain where these very same elites who already have a lot of power today may still get something out of this package of reforms. So we should be practical about it. And what could they get from this? The original idea was a transfer of more resources in exchange for a strengthening of accountability and governance. This was the basic narrative. And I think the original Bayanihan Constitution, the design of this proposed constitution, had a very good and compelling grand bargain infused into the proposal. However, I will remind all our colleagues that the challenge, of course, was the Mandanas decision already gave away the resources that was supposed to be part of the proposal. That's number one. And number two, and I will be very candid about this, it seems that there have been centralizing tendencies of this particular administration rather than decentralizing tendencies to show us basically how it could work better if you actually had greater federalism. So, in fact, the anti-drugs campaign is a great example of a centralizing policy that was implemented, maybe well meant, but one of its main rationales was you cannot trust the different provinces and regions where they have been captured by some of these interests already, right? And I will not review all the other centralizing tendencies, but I think that is part of the context that makes pushing this reform a little difficult in today's Philippines. The other aspect, of course, is we need to build stronger unity and cohesion to accept such a big reform. And I think this was the debate between the incrementalists and the shock therapists. I'm just going to oversimplify it. I think si Dean Ed mentioned this earlier. That's why there was an emergence of a middle ground. The first is the incrementalists. We're thinking if we are to implement a proposed constitution like this and we are not prepared, we can actually end up with a lot of harm rather than more good. So why don't we do this slowly and over time and build the strength towards an eventual federalism that we aspire to? Of course, the other argument is we've been trying that since 1986 and we've not actually been progressing as fast as we want precisely because of the built-in political economy pushing back against the reforms. So this group they were saying then that maybe what we need is a little shock therapy, something more innovative and dramatic, such as a new constitution. And I'm heartened to note that in between these two groups, there is now middle ground potentially emerging to show that we can actually push many of the aspirations of the Bayanihan Constitution in preparation for potential federalism in the future uh, through a maximization of our present decentralization structure. And I will concede to the experts in this webinar that yes, we are constrained by our constitution, by our governance status quo, by many other things. But there are key areas that could still keep us together, keep this group together, pushing for the aspiration of Chief Justice Puno, Sen Nene, and not losing the momentum that we have established to point out the flaws in our governance, to point out the flaws in our economy and in our society and politics, to basically push for those uh, preparatory reforms that can eventually become a realization of maybe stronger federalism one day. And so I think that's my main contribution in today's discussion is a practical assessment of where to take this at this point because we are about a year and a half away from elections. I don't know that people are still envisioning a dramatic reform such as changing the constitution in the next year and a half. If so, I think that would be such a big gamble. But I do think that the momentum established by Sen Nene, by Chief Justice Puno, by Dean Alex and others to envision a better, stronger system for our democracy, our economy, our political system. I think this is a momentum that we should not lose. This is a coalition that we should keep building and include, enlarge the circle of those who believe in this reform. And I myself am an admitted convert on many of the ideas sort of tabled in the discussions that started since 2016. I am a follower of Sen Nene. I think Dean Alex knows this. I campaigned for him as vice president when I was still in my teens. But his push for decentralization, I'd like to think, is an aspiration towards a stronger democracy for us and something that we can really coalesce around and hopefully build a momentum around in the coming year and a half in preparation for 2022. Thank you so much for the chance to share these ideas. And thank you again to Chief Justice Puno for this excellent presentation.
Thank you so much, Dean Ron. I didn't mean to brand you about your dynasty book, but it's certainly a very, very respected work. But definitely, Dean Ron and the Ateneo School of Government have also been in the forefront of, among other things, pushing for responsive governance. And in fact, his presentation today just reflected us, telling us about, about the fact that incrementalists and shock therapists. I remember in the early debates of devolution, not only in the Philippines, but in Indonesia as well, or in Thailand, there was two approaches. Should it be the big bang or the faces? Should it be big bang or face? And I think what Dean Ron is mentioning, why don't we look at the quote unquote, the golden mean, if you may? And many of us in this room are indeed looking at that direction. And thank you so much, Dean Ron, for that. And also thank you for your point about the fact that, hey, why don't we maximize decentralization at this point in time, given that, as you pointed out also, the Mandanas decision has already been implemented. That's billions of pesos already transferred. And if you recall, dear friends, many of you were with us last time when we had no less than Governor Mandanas speaking about that. As we mentioned, this is a continuing discourse. And thank you very much, Dinron, for that important point about maximizing at this point the decentralization, the evolution aspect, and really creating, if you may, a coalition of people focusing on our collective vision of more responsive governance. And that's what binds us all together here. Thank you so much, Dean Ron, for your very sharp presentation. I would like now to introduce, these are now the young generation, and when Clarice was saying, let's invite, if you may, our young generation, but young, but certainly very bright academic. I'm referring to none less than Raphael Montes. He has been with the Center for Local and Regional Governance of the University of the Philippines and has been branded, if you may, this is the positive brand, the center's resident expert on federalism. Because among other things, among the books he authored are those that I just mentioned, but he also served as a project leader of CLRG's Federalism Studies. and knowledge exchange cooperation with the Institute of Federalism, the IFF, the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. He was also a visiting research scholar at IFF in 2008 and occasional lectures on federalism at UPNCPAG and outside the universities with local governments, national governments, among others. No? He has been NCPAG's National Public Administration's regular delegate to Local Government Initiative and Network Asia, LOG in Asia, a network of local government stakeholders in Asia region. And he's also a member of the Board of Trustees of a number of foundations, including the Public Administration Foundation. And he has a BA in Political Science, a diploma on Federalism from the Institute of Federalism at the University of Fribourg and in Switzerland, and a certificate of expertise on e-learning development from Teleakademie, University of Fort Wangen, Germany. So friends, I'd like to introduce you to a young but very, very bright scholar, my friend, Paeng Montes, Raphael N. Montes. Paeng, take it away, sir.
Maraming salamat po at magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Thank you very much for the generous introduction, Boss Alex. When actually Dr. Brillantes approached me to be part of this webinar, naisip ko, sino ba naman ako para maging reactor after CJ Puno and Dr. Mendoza. And I would like to thank the organizers for their confidence that also maybe some of my views could also be heard in this webinar. I suppose my comments will be based on the many things that I have heard from the grapevine among LGUs. As mentioned by Dr. Brillantes, I have been working at least for 20 years with local governments now. And some of them, especially the leagues who know that I have been dealing with federalism as a research topic, have been asking me about the fate of local governments under a sort of a federal Philippines. And also, CLRG, our center, undertook a comparative study on subnational designs in federations not long before the CONCOM was formed. But I think we did it with the PDP Laban Federalism Institute when they had a federalism studies group. I think I am in agreement with most of what Dr. Mendoza had said. But I think I would like to emphasize one issue that I think should be very important, especially if we're talking about local autonomy. And where are the LGUs in the picture with the federal the Bayanihan Federalism Constitution? And what the leagues were telling me is that there was hardly any mention of local governments at all in the Constitution, while there was a lot of articulation with regard to what the federal government would look like, the sharing of the powers between the federal government and the federated regions. The local governments were saying that at least in the 1987 Constitution they are mentioned, but with regard to the proposed Constitution, that they have this apprehension that siguro Chief Justice would be able to explain the originalist perspective of constitutional law, that if you are not mentioned in the Constitution, it leaves a lot more room for interpretation later on with regard to a particular provision. So, for example, if local government autonomy is not specifically specified in the Constitution, does that mean that the federated regions will have full authority in modifying what we have already now? Because we are not operating from a zero point, that there is currently no autonomy with the local governments, especially particularly in regard to the Mandanas ruling, when local governments now feel that they are a lot more empowered by getting all these resources. So parang that sort of has changed also the the parameters of engagement with local governments. That will they be more susceptible to the idea of this federal constitution when the resources have sort of uh, changed a little bit of the game, because that is what they have been fighting for. Um, so let me just cite some examples of more modern federal constitutions as compared to, say, the American Constitution, which has largely remained unchanged, and it was a 17th century instrument. But for example, more newer constitutions like the Swiss Constitution, which was enacted in 1999, in spite of the fact that it doesn't particularly have very detailed provisions about local governments, it does say that the state governments or the cantonal governments must ensure the autonomy of local governments, and that would mean that they would have to articulate that in their state constitutions or in their organic laws, on how they would want to approach the relationship between the region and the local governments, because that now changes the dynamics between the relationship of the national to the local governments. So even the Brazilian constitution is also as compared to the Swiss constitution, is very specific, defining the powers and functions and the structures of municipal government. So I mean, there are options that are out there already, and there is existing practice where we can refer to that, just to assuage the the apprehensions of the local governments on nasaan ba talaga sila within the picture of the greater autonomy that's going to be granted by the federal constitution. And in a sense, also echoing some comments of Dr. Paul Hutchcroft, who has been a very long time observer in the Philippines, while we are trying to strengthen the regions as the, the intermediary level of government, we should also not forget that there have already been building blocks established by the local government code. And without clarifying that within the proposed Bayanihan Constitution, uh, you might have reluctant stakeholders who are the eventual advocates in the communities, who are the local government officials, who still have a lot of these things at the back of their minds. What will happen to them? And not a lot of them, and you know, there are people out there who are not parts of dynasties, and still they are thinking about, you know, the opportunities that the local government code had already provided for them so far. I was also um, a little bit fascinated by the discussion on creeping federalism, because the use of the terminology, in fact, reflects a certain type of ideology in looking at incremental federalism, as Dr. Mendoza had said it. Because introduction of incrementalism and the preconditions attached to it will eventually define the success of 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 the type of decentralization or federalization that you will have. For example, uh, I I heard Chief Justice Puno say that in the debate they were thinking that that creeping federalism will not work if you precondition it to economic viability. And yes, it will never work, because there will be regions which will not reach that point of economic viability, because uh, regions have different resource endowments, and then there are regions who will have resources uh, in their possession, whether you are in a unitary system or whether you are in a federal system. There are regions which have potential oil. There are regions who have big mining sites, and from that perspective, there are regions who don't have that, and the resource differences, the resource disparities, uh, will just hamper economic viability if that is made as a precondition for incrementalism. What incrementalism does offer is that uh, you can have practice as an autonomous entity uh, before you achieve full autonomy. And countries like Belgium and Spain um, had offered this model of incrementalism. Um, for example, Spain, which is not federal, uh, but has more federal-like provisions in its constitution uh, as compared to the Bayanihan Constitution. Because in all honesty, I found that the provisions for the federal regions were a little bit sparse compared to, say, other federal constitutions, that modern ones that have greatly more defined the powers and functions and the relationship between within the federated regions. Um, for example, you have countries like uh, South Africa, which has provided a framework for subnational design in the federal constitution, and saying that this will be the structure and the design for all federated regions. But it did not say that they cannot, say, adopt their own organic act. For our Bayanihan constitution, there were only two regions which were given the chance to articulate self-organization. And my guess is with the Bayanihan constitution is that the articulation for self-organization will have to be done in individual statutes or regional statutes, which would provide you a very, very disparate legal basis for how your regional government will be formed, as compared to, say, having one organic law which will define how your entire regional system and local government system will be structured according to an organic law, which is an extension of the federal constitution, because that is how federal experts Michael Burgess and Alan Tarr have identified state constitutions. Because there is a view on some people that state constitutions are rival constitutions to the federal constitutions. But in practice, in the US, in other countries where there are state constitutions, in fact, that the state constitutions enhance the federal constitution, and it is not a rival to that. And what is fascinating to me is that, or a question that maybe I would ask the members of the CONCOM, is that was that ever even contemplated or even debated among the members of the CONCOM, whether to give all the other regions except for CAR and for BRMM to have their own organic laws. I think um the proportional system in the regional assemblies is a breath of fresh air, and I think uh, experts like Dr. Araral had actually advocated for that as a countermeasure to the traditional politicians that get elected to our assemblies, because that is now on the basis of party representation within a legislature. But I think what was not what I think we missed with this current draft is the maximization of the proportional system, because the proportional system works well in a parliamentary system, which sadly lost by one vote. but if you look at it, even if it is not parliamentary, a proportional system still works as a countermeasure towards a centralizing chief executive who wields all the executive power. Because, for example, even in the US, where you have a presidential system, and even at the state level, it looks like a presidential system where the so-called chief executive is the governor. But if you look at the states in the United States, there are other executives who are elected. So you have the attorney general who is elected, you have the secretary of state who is elected, you have the treasurer who is elected, which only means that executive power is further diffused. So you don't have a centralizing of executive power in just one person, and they are forced to work together, because sometimes the governor could be Republican, the treasurer could be a Democrat, or a different permutation, or the attorney general could be a Democrat, the governor would be a Republican. So in that sense, that type of collegial government, which is further taken into a much more entrepreneurial system with the Swiss system, where a collegial government means that your executive, which is a committee, will reflect what is reflected in your parliament. So if you have a proportional system, where you have four parties that have gained substantial representation, that would mean that those four parties will be represented in your regional executive. Uh, the default is that instead of just having a majoritarian winner take all, is that you will have a coalition government by default, and that all the parties will have to work together. And I think if you're looking at it from a Bayanihan perspective, is that by default, even political parties who are rivals in politics, if you have that sort of consensual uh, coalition government structure in the executive and as well as in the legislature, that would strengthen the cooperative nature of, 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 of a governmental structure at the regional level. So I don't know whether that
Oh,
makes sense
certainly.
to our audience so far. But I think just one last point po, would be taxation, which I think is always the elephant in the room, but not a lot of people talk about it. Yung pong research ko sa Institute of Federalism was about equalization. I was fortunate enough to have another Filipino scholar with me who was dealing with taxation. And there was a lot of exchange between the two of us with regard to reforming the taxation system if and when the federalism is adopted in this country. Ang ano lang po ang aming perspective lang, no? And marami rin po ako nakausap na mga tao who were dealing with political economy is that what was not mentioned by CJ Puno was the sharing scheme. What he said was 50% of all the taxes, national taxes, will be given to the regions. But in the sharing scheme that was proposed, all regions will receive the same amount. And from the perspective of fiscal management and fiscal decentralization, that would only mean that there will be disincentives for high performing regions because no matter how good they are with, say, investment promotion, with incentives, that the tax shares that they will get from national government is the same tax share that they will, that the lazy ones or the lazy ones or the least performing ones would be getting. And there won't be any incentive for the or for the least performing regions to enhance their performance with regard to attracting more taxes to their region because then they're going to receive the same amount. So I mean, ano mag-effort pa ba ako kasi we're all receiving the same amount. So that could be something that in fact might be thought of initially as equalizing, but in the end it could in fact be counter equalizing, and which an equalization system might not be able to solve because in many federations disparity is a reality of life, and a lot of people, the majority of their people actually live with it. And they accept it that it is a reality in life that in certain areas you would have high taxes, in certain areas you would have low taxes, in spite of the fact that there are areas where you have unitary taxation systems or the double taxation systems in other areas. And the experts say that it doesn't matter really who collects the taxes. It doesn't matter who sets the rates, right? Or whether it is a double taxation or a unitary system. What actually matters is the sharing system.
Okay.
So, nung sinabi po ni Chief Justice, and this is my last point na lang po siguro, na 50% would go to the region. If you look at it just from that perspective, so if you are, say, Calabar zone, and you hear that 50% of all the taxes for income tax, corporate and personal, and excise taxes would go to you, that's an easier computation because that is taxes collected in your region. And with regard to equalization, that would be a better reference on who would now need the subsidies from federal government. So if you're now Calabar Zone or NCR, you no longer need that. So you're out of the equalization system already. And that has to be a much more clearer articulation in the federal constitution on how the equalization system will have to be set up, and not just to make it completely reliable on the decisions of the Intergovernmental Relations Commission. So those are just a few of my thoughts. I think even in designing whether it's a federal system or we're amending the local government code, I think those points would still be valid. And I think if we are looking further afield, um, if we are there are some some proposals that if we don't get this wholesale amendment of the 87 Constitution, and I think this would be a question to CJ and all the other commissioners, would the amendment of the article on local governments and regions and placing the distribution of powers there would suffice to say sort of have a quasi-federal setup, at least in the 1987 Constitution. That's a question, and I think again looking further ahead, federalism doesn't end with the enactment of a constitution. In fact, federalism is more than just the federal constitution. It is a way of life. And if you ask people who live in federal countries, they have learned to live with it. And it needs practice. And if we look at the experience of Belgium, which took about more than 30 years for them to transition. So they did a lot of practice first before they finally said that we need to enact a federal constitution enshrining all the practices that we have with regard to autonomy of their regional communities. And I guess in that sense, that would also reflect my bias towards incrementalism in a sense. But again, incrementalism must be tempered by a timeline. So let's say you have a transition period of say 5 or 10 years. By the time that your incrementalism peaks or ends, it should you should have a clearer picture on how autonomous, whether symmetrical or asymmetrical, would your regions be. So yung po.
Thank you very much, Paeng.
Maraming salamat po.
I'm glad that you point out the timeline because there is a number of questions here in the chat box about timeline, and that also moves into what you and Professor Ron mentioned about incrementalist or the Big Bang, I would call it, or the shock therapist. And I think what you mentioned also, and I think Chief Justice, I think this is the elephant in the room among those local governments. Nung sinulat po yung Constitution, bakit po walang mention ang autonomy? Of course, and we all there were all, and that's also what Paeng mentioned. That what happened to the mention of local governments? Is that already just assumed already? Because in one sense, kapag nag-federal po, maaari pong sure nag-state ka, pero within the state, highly centralized naman po. I think that was, yun po yung hugot ng tanong ni Paeng, at I've heard that also. But anyway, maybe before we proceed to the Chief Justice, are there any initial questions from you? I put in the timeline po. Well, actually, it's a similar question that was raised po by Eli Fernandez, no, and also Mr. Haujan. They talk about the importance of the timeline, the importance of yeah, that's one particular aspect. I'm sorry, I lost it now, but I took some notes. Si Eli at saka si Mr. Haujan po raised some questions about that, no, that we need to clear out the powers of the states, no, and for you, Ron. For Attorney Mendoza, are you for overhauling the system under the present constitution, or do you favor federalism for the country? So the whole question really of you say incrementalism and shock therapist, but obviously, and I'll shut up after this. I mentioned in terms of timeline, we're about to have elections. So siguro this is all part of the movement towards federalism, not necessarily under this administration, but we certainly can build upon, use upon the incredible innovations in the Bayanihan Constitution that included, among other things, no, not only federalism but impeachment, the Bill of Rights, etc. No, I think it's very, very important. Okay, so are there any particular questions, or Mr. Chief Justice, perhaps let's address that question on what happened to the mention of local government. Maybe that would be something also that well, Tatay Nene would have wanted to respond, or if there are any commissioners. Would you like to respond, sir?
Yes, we have discussed with the LGUs this alleged omission of their mention in the Bayanihan Constitution. In fact, we have conducted a lot of dialogues with the League of Governors, the League of Mayors. And we have explained to them that there is no intention at all to prejudice what is now enjoyed by the local governments in their in regard to what they are now enjoying in terms of decentralized powers and so on. But we explained to them that what we follow is the traditional division of powers. Number one, the powers of the federal government, and number two, the powers of the state members, or in our case, the region. So there is no tertiary division of powers, unlike, for instance, in other jurisdictions, as cited by Raphael. But we have conversations with these local officials, and they are convinced that there is not that division of powers. In fact, you look at the structure of the regional assemblies and the other power structures, you will find that they're the ones who will be running these assemblies and these executives. And I will not suppose that these assemblies will be passing, regional laws that will prejudice them.
But that's a possibility, isn't it, Chief Justice? Like I know, for instance, that has been a debate in the arm, for instance, in terms of, okay, meron nga tayong arm, pero hey, mukhang yata ang naging centralizing aspect ay hindi na sa national pero sa region. So I guess that was the apprehension na baka naman maging centralized naman sa regional level. I thought that's why maybe an assurance from the LGUs that hey, we continue with the whole principle of autonomy as guaranteed in the 1987 Constitution. I think it's just a apprehension that they mentioned, if I recall, sir.
Yeah, of course, but you know, if you talk of possibilities, you will not end, in talking about what is probable. But we are making a constitution, and we don't deal with all the probabilities.
Sir, if you don't mind, I'm waiting for one question. Please raise your hand. No? The question of Sir Ronald about incrementalism. Of course, a practical question, and I think, sir, you yourself mentioned about the fact that being practical, and so did Dr. Mendoza, practical. Looking at the timeline right now, with the coming elections next year, how would you, I guess, maximize, if you may, the innovations that were brought about into the Constitution? Is there still time, or should there be time should we still continue with this constitutional change at this point in time? And I think, Ron, I don't want to be speaking for you, Pare, but would you like to articulate more of that, where I think you mentioned towards then that it can be a bit dangerous at this point? Okay. Would you like to articulate? And I think the Chief Justice may want to respond.
Well, just briefly, Dean Alex, we are, if I may remind everyone, under pandemic right now. And I don't know to what extent we have the means to push for such a dramatic reform with so little time left under this administration. But we still have an opportunity, I think, to push for key specific areas for reform, either within the year and a half that is still remaining, or as campaign issues, so that more people can join this particular group of like-minded to push for a coalition to continue the reform discussion into the next administration. And better yet, elect a president who will actually promise to push for some of the reforms that we're talking about. So that's just my main concern is we have a global economic crisis, a global economic slowdown. We have a pandemic, and we have to prepare for an election where we have to assume that we still have COVID-19 in May 2022. So I think those are the main challenges that are just much more immediate that we have to address.
But the discourse continues. As the Chief Justice also mentioned, our discussion on the search for appropriate political administrative system continues. I mean, as early as the 70s, we're talking about this now. Chief Justice, would you like to address the quote-unquote the timeline, sir, or
Yes,
practical timeline?
yeah, of course, but precisely our point is that all this crisis brought about by this pandemic, by this typhoons, they all sharpen the need for a federal government. Nakita natin yung kahit na anong gawing response nung national government. Masisipag naman yung mga opisyalis natin. Pero hindi nila magawa. Ayun lang distribution ng tulong doon sa mahihirap under yung bayanihan na gawa. Hindi nagawa yun eh. We are not blaming any specific person, but it's the unitary government, and then they suffer from a lot of red tapes. Ang daming regulasyon dyan. Pag nag-violate ka nung regulasyon, dadaling ka sa ombudsman. Kanya kawawa rin sila. Oh.
You mentioned that at the outset, sir. We observed the very nice presentation that, hey, let's look at the unitary versus federal, and by itself, by default, if you may, the centralized nature, without blaming anybody, really forces. Yes. Okay, I think you mentioned that. There's
Now,
very...
yes, but you talk about the timeline. The timeline will ultimately depend on what will be the will of the people.
Okay.
Yeah, itong tama naman lahat yung mga predictions by the experts na itong crisis na ito will not leave us until perhaps 2-3 years from now. But do we want to still suffer from this unitary system? But at the very least, we should have this issue on the table, on the political table, this 2020 election. Who will be the candidates who will espouse federalism? We are not saying that they espouse our federal bayanihan system. They can espouse other kinds of federalism. For instance, what you are referring here as incremental federalism, referred to in other jurisdictions as creeping federalism. Yan inoffer na rin ng House of Representatives natin when President GMA was the speaker.
Yes.
Yung sinasabing yung mga regions magpipresent na lang ng kanilang organic law at approvein nung Kongreso, nung House of Representatives. Yun ay kinuha yan sa Spanish model eh. But is that the model that we want? We want these political people to be approving these organic acts on a case-to-case basis. Yun ang problema dyan. Yung so-called incremental. Bayaan na lang natin itong mga regions na ito. Hindi, ang tingin namin, hindi yan angkop sa bayan natin. Walang mangyayari dyan. Ganon din sa sinasabi nilang unti-unting decentralization of powers. Ang ama ng decentralization, si Nene Pimentel. At nakita niya na it's time really to adopt a federal form of government. Hindi itong unti-unting decentralization na wala namang nangyari sa ating bayan. So at the very least, let us have this,
the debate.
let's have this continuing discourse. Let us see the people who will run for public office, who are in favor of federalism and who are against.
In fact, President Tony Callo says, we definitely need a champion or champions to push the momentum. How do advocates of federalism move forward, whether through incrementalism or shock therapy, to build on the momentum? And he says, I agree with CJ Puno that ultimately it is the people who will get this done. But the people need champion, or champions to get this done. So I guess part of our continuing discussion is really part of that, keeping the discussion on federalism, whether creeping, whether shock, whether devolution, the discourse continues in spite of the many, many problems that we have. And as you pointed out, Chief Justice, many of the concerns right now could perhaps have been better addressed. Here's a nuts and bolts. I think we have time for one more question. A nuts and bolts question from Dean Joel Tantores regarding tax. The issue on tax collection and sharing should be addressed, for after all, this is the bottom line. Business enterprises do business globally and regionally, and maybe demotivated investing in the Philippines or in the regions if they have to tend with various federal governments in doing business that may impose overlapping requirements. Dean Joel is from the College of Business Administration and used to be the chair of the BIR, if I recall. The role of the BIR and BOC may have to be cautiously defined as to not undermine its undermine its efficiency. Finally, the points raised regarding LGU sharing of revenues, which may depart from the ERA system, are all valid and should be taken into consideration. So this whole tax issue is really very, very important. Financing, and I know we've had one forum with that with my good friend Chat Manasan at one point. Would you like?
Maybe that should be discussed in connection with the Mandana's decision.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yes, in fact, I had some meetings with Governor Mandanas after the Supreme Court came out with that decision, and he wanted to constitutionalize the Mandana's decision in our 1987 Constitution through people's initiative. Why did he want the constitutionalization of a Supreme Court decision? Because of his fear that unless this is incorporated in the Constitution, that advantage, that decision can be taken away by the legislature. The law can be rearranged so that the decision can be diluted, or the enforcement of the decision can be impeded in several ways. And so that is precisely the point of federalism. You know, what should be due to the region should be constitutionalized. And the way we divided the power, especially the financial sharing, what the regions will be getting will be much more than the Mandana's decision. And what they will be getting will be grafted in the Constitution itself.
But the accompanying question, sir, as you also mentioned in your presentation, would be the importance of accompanied by transfers of resources accompanied by accountabilities, which is what you also mentioned in your presentation, and also by Dean Mendoza. The accompanying issue of pananagutan.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, but again, the committee debated this aspect of accountability, and again, our belief is that the federal government should have this ultimate power, to see to it that there is really equitable division of powers. And,
question and answer na
and
about
so,
federalism.
so on and so forth. because the kind of federalism that we have is the so-called coming together
Yes, yes, yes.
of federalism. It is opposed to the other kinds of federalism, especially the American kind, where you have sovereign states that are really sovereign in character. They form the federal government. That is why you look at the division of powers in the federal constitution of the United States. The original intent is to give more powers to the states. That is the original intent. But in the course of time, the United States slowly became a world power. And there was need to strengthen the federal government. And the strengthening was done not by a political branch of government, but by the Supreme Court of the United States, by various interpretations of the division of powers between the federal government and the states. And so now you have a shifting of power there from the states to the federal through interpretations by the Supreme Court. But that we cannot follow that original structure of the United States federal government. But as I said, we are in an opposite, different situation. We have a unitary form of government, and we are breaking it up, forming regions of unequal economic strength. And so, where do you put the axis of power? We put it in the federal government and not in the regions.
Wow. Well, the discussion continues. I know we don't have that much time, but perhaps before I call on Chief Justice to say the final word, I was wondering if our colleagues, Dean Ron or Sir Paeng, would have any more would have any final insights as to this very, very important discussion, continuing discussion that we have had. Because as we mentioned, this discussion or discourse on federalism is a continuing series of the Pimentel Center for Leadership and Governance. Maybe I can start with Paeng, then Ron. Would you have any parting words? And I will ask the Chief Justice.
Uh, very short na lang po. I think nanggaling na rin po kay CJ Puno dati na at least having a document where we can have sort of a reference of discussion on what we really have for our vision of federalism. And sabi nila, hindi naman final daw yung document kasi they're still open for dialogue and for improvements. And I think that's how you actually build on a constitution. It just doesn't come from a group of experts, but you also have organically thoughts of other stakeholders coming into it. And I suppose lahat naman po tayo dito have our bias on ensuring regional and local autonomy in the future. And I hope to be still part of this group in honor of Tatay Nene na rin po, he has been there during my career when I started in the late 1990s. And sabi niya nga, every time we meet, tayo na naman Paeng. So kahit wala na siya ngayon, sana po yung mga kasama natin ngayon dito ay maging tayo pa rin yung magiging part of the people who will continue to defend local autonomy and see through yung whatever the goals of federalism for the betterment of the country. Maraming salamat.
Within the context of continuing nation building. Thank you very much, Paeng.
Salamat po.
Dean Ron, would you like to say a final remark, sir?
Well, let me just go back to our conundrum, which is the crux of this discussion is that we have a system, a status quo, where the elites actually have no interest to change the system, and where we're trying to implement some dramatic reforms. So I always go back to the end game, which is the elections. We need to elect more leaders who believe in these deep reforms, who believe in the types of governance that will actually promote inclusive development in the country. and only then do we then have the opportunities, the windows for dramatic reforms, both in the introduction of deep policies like a possible new constitution, but also in the execution of these policies, because starting points matter, as you know, Dean Alex, in economic development. So if our starting point is not very good, then even the best reforms may actually be sidelined or hijacked and may malfunction. So I do think I go back to the original proposition, which is to build a coalition that believes in these reforms. And I believe Sen Nene throughout his lifetime has been producing many converts already, and people who will take on his advocacy well into the future for this country. So let me just end with that hopeful.
Wow. Very well said. And this is really part of our continuing lectures in honor of Senator Tatay. But I would like to give the floor for the last word to our very illustrious, very brilliant, and sir, we really learned so much from your lecture, among other things. May I call on our Honorable Chief Justice Puno. Thank you for your words of wisdom. Sir, any final words, Mr. Chief Justice?
Well, first, let me thank the Pimentel Institute as well as Hans Seidel Foundation for hosting this lecture series. We learn a lot from each other, and I thank Dean Mendoza and Raphael Montes for the many insights that they have given. Well, let me say that ultimately it's the people that will decide whether we should have this federalism now, and what that timeline will be followed. This is all a part of the exercise of the sovereignty of our people. And I like to think that, we talk about possible impediments that will be coming from the dynasties, from the oligarchs, the elites. But I like to think that these obstacles will be thrown about, but by the undesirable variety. But you look at the design of the Bayanihan Constitution. This will result in a fairer, more equitable system of economics. And all this illegitimate business, this legitimate businessmen of ours will endorse what they just demand is a fair playing field. And so with our other politicians, though these people who do not belong to these dynasties, and they are more in a number than these dynasties. Again, I like to suppose that the majority of our politicians will welcome, this ban against dynasties. That is the grand design of the Bayanihan Constitution. We have provisions, to improve the economy. Provisions to make the economic field fairer. Well, why should this be? Why should this run against the will of the legitimate business people? And so, again, my take is that let us put forward all these issues, the refinement of the issues, as pointed out by Dean Mendoza, by Raphael Montes. We are not saying that the Bayanihan Constitution is a perfect constitution that is beyond amendment or revision. This is a draft, a working draft. And again, let's continue with this conversation, with this discourse, so that ultimately, we will be able to establish what is good for the Filipino people. That is what we want, and this coming elections, we want to put this on the table.
Thank you very much for those very, very encouraging, positive remarks, that very, very practical and important points, Mr. Chief Justice. And I think that relates to what Ron also mentioned about the grand bargain, that, about with the elites. Hey, let's have a grand bargain here where we will all benefit from this if we move towards that direction. And this is really part of the continuing advocacy of the Pimentel Center. As we mentioned, dear friends, this is really part of our Pimentel Memorial Series. And I remember seeing you, Chief Justice, when you yourself gave your own honoring during the anniversary of Senator Nene. So thank you, dear friends. I'm so happy. Hans Sedel, Carol, you're still with us. And of course, many of you are still with us. We have reached at least 200 participants earlier, but discussion continues. And I will now turn this over to Clarice, who will tell you about your certificates, for those of you who would like a certificates, and our ongoing series. And we continue to be a community. It is a project of knowledge co-creation, continuing project of knowledge co-creation. 1 + 1 = 3. In spite of the pandemic, in spite of the limitations, we come together and continue pushing the envelope, if you may, for good, responsive, accountable governance, which is what the PILG is all about. Clarice, I now turn it over to you for any announcements. You are muted, Clarice.
Again, on behalf of the Pimentel Institute for Leadership and Governance, we would like to say thank you so much to our speakers and to the participants. For those who want to get a certificate, email me at rcroffice@yahoo.com. So we will provide you with certificates. And again, also, I would like to say thank you to our partners, the Hans Seidel Foundation, and to the College of Continuing Advanced and Professional Studies of the University of Makati. Thank you so much for attending this seminar online on federalism. God bless. Keep safe, everyone.
See you in the next webinar.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mabuhay po, Chief Justice.
Thank you po sa
Mabuhay
inyong
po kayo, sir.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice. Thank you,
Thank
Dean.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Brillantes,
Thank you.
Dean Mendoza, Sir
Okay.
Montes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please,
Please,
Chief
answer
Justice.
form, please.
Thank you,
Gwen, nice to
Nanay
see you,
B
Gwen.
and Kom Gwen.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Dean
Gwen.
Tapia.
Hi, Kom
Nice to see you,
Gwen.
Gwen.
Hi, Professor Montes.
Hello.
Nanay.
Thank you.
Hi, Nanay B.
Nanay is here. Thank you, Nanay.
See you all again. Ayan,
Yes,
si
see
Dean.
you all again. Enjoy your weekend. Take care.
Long weekend. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, Clarice.
Bye. Stay safe.
Okay.
You can download the material sent by Ding Generoso. Very, very good. No?
Okay.
Yes, oo.
Please download that. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you,
Okay.
sir. See
Clarice
you.
down,
Gwen,
please.
so good to see you.
Thank you, Lex.
Thank you, everyone.
Yun nga.